Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 1 of my Star Wars Legends Chronological review series. In this series, I plan to review every single piece of media in the Star Wars Legends timeline in order, and that means the films, the TV shows, the books, the games, the comics, the short stories, and everything else in between. In this first video, I'm going to give a little bit of a background on myself as a Star Wars fan and why I want to do this series, as well as a breakdown of exactly how the series is going to work. But if you just want to go ahead and skip to the first review, I'm going to put the time to that in the video right here. So I consider myself a lifelong Star Wars fan. My dad brought me up on the original 6 movies. I watched the Clone Wars on Cartoon Network when I was younger, and The Force Awakens only came out when I was 13, so I've been really invested in everything that Disney's been doing since their acquisition of Star Wars. But beyond those movies and TV shows, I really haven't explored any of the Star Wars universe outside of it. I've played Jedi Fallen Order and The Force Unleashed on the DS when I was like 12, but I haven't read any of the comics, any of the books, and so many of these other video games I've just never even laid eyes on. So what I originally wanted to do was do a chronological run through of the canon EU as it is right now, because that's the timeline that I'm the most familiar with, and that's the one that's the most relevant and is being updated right now. However, I realized that was going to be pretty hard considering how fast canon gets updated, especially with the new High Republic stuff coming out at the time I'm writing this. It would be really hard to start at a single point in the timeline. So I thought, well, there's a whole other timeline of Star Wars media that isn't being updated right now, so I might as well go read all of that. Also, another thing that inspired me to look into Legends was the new Obi-Wan Kenobi show. And the Obi-Wan Kenobi show has a lot of really deep cut references to Legends. I remember seeing one kid in the city of Daiyu who is credited in the credits as Corran Horn, who's a pretty important Legends character. And there's a lot of names of the Jedi on the walls of the planet Jabeam, like Ram Koda, who I recognize from The Force Unleashed. So watching that show sort of made me realize, not really realize, but remember that there's a whole other dimension of Star Wars that they are pulling from to construct the new canon, kind of in the same way that Marvel is constructing the MCU from their original comics and those original characters. And so I feel like if I went through and read all of the Legends stories, that would help me understand and better appreciate Star Wars going forward. Now, the way I'm going to go about the actual series is that I have compiled this giant Google Sheets document full of every novel, short story, game, comic, whatever that I can find. And I'm compiling pretty much 2 big lists that I found. One of them is from StarWarsReadingOrder.com, and the other one is from Wikipedia in their Legends timeline order. Both of those lists are really long and really comprehensive, but both have certain things that are missing from each other, so I decided that I should compile them into one big list so that I know I'm really not missing anything. And I couldn't find any other fan-made lists or whatever online, so I just decided to take a lot of time and make my own. Everything that I am including in my timeline list is something that adds a new story to the Legends timeline. So this won't include things like reference books. What I'm also deciding not to include are a lot of the adaptations of certain things, like there's a lot of comic adaptations of the movies that I'm not going to include, and things like that. Young reader adaptations, things that just retread things that have already been shown in live action media. I'm not just going to reread all of those. There are also a few things I'm leaving out that, while they do technically add a new story to the timeline, they are made for really little kids, and while, yes, they do technically add a new story, they are either really, really obscure and just virtually unknown by the community, or they just really don't add anything of value. I also know that a strict chronological order is usually not the recommended way to first get into the Star Wars Legends EU, but I'm doing this pretty much so that I know I do not miss anything. Because if I started with the Thrawn trilogy, for example, which is one of the most common suggested starting points for Legends, then it would be kind of random and directionless where I might want to go next. And if I'm going to make it a personal challenge to consume every story in Legends, I think that a chronological way would be the most surefire way. I don't miss anything. And I also just think that it would be a really fun way to watch the overarching Star Wars story unfold. Especially if you are a hardcore, longtime Legends fan, this might be fun to see a newcomer see some of those stories and make the connections as they go along, even if I may miss some things because it's my first go around. So, for the reviews themselves, I'm going to try and keep them pretty simple. I will give a summary of all of the relevant plot points and the characters, pretty much what happens in the book or the comic or the game or whatever. And then I'm going to talk about, what I liked, what I didn't like, things I see that are connected to other points in the Star Wars timeline, all those little connections I notice as I go through. And maybe if I feel like it, I'll give each piece of media a rating out of 5 or out of 10 or on a A to F scale. I don't know. I'll give some sort of rating. So I'd like to go ahead and say right now that I'd like this series and this channel to be focused on positivity. If I come across something that I might not like, I'm not going to try and bash it or focus on it for too long or bash anyone that likes it. I feel like there's way too much of that in Star Wars online right now. So whatever Star Wars content you love or you don't love, this series will hopefully be a good place for you. Because for me, Star Wars is about escapism, maybe learning some valuable lessons, but most importantly, about having fun. Alright guys, well, I think I have gone on for long enough. The Star Wars Legends timeline covers 200,000 years of galactic history, spanning about 35 years worth of media, so let's not wait any longer. I'm going to give you guys my review for the very first piece of Star Wars Legends media, which is a short story titled A Soldier Story, Notron in Flames. A Soldier Story, Notron in Flames takes place 200,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, which makes it the absolute earliest point on the Star Wars Legends timeline. The story itself is mentioned here in this book, The Essential Guide to Warfare by Jason Fry. Overall, this is a fantastic reference book that is written mostly from an in-universe perspective and fills you in on all of the galaxy's major wars and technology. However, the conflict we're going to look at right now takes place on ancient Coruscant between two races, the Zhel and the Tongs. The Zhel are widely believed to be the ancestors of humans, and the Tongs are an alien race that are believed to be the predecessors of the Mandalorian culture. The story itself is just an excerpt of an in-universe historical document known as Da Warda Verda, which in the Mandoa language means Warriors of the Shadow, and Notron in Flames is only a small piece of that epic poem. I think it's important to point out that this epic poem as a whole is referred to in-universe as sort of a legend or a myth. The researchers in-universe don't really know for sure if this story happened exactly the way it did, when it happened, when they think it did, or if it even happened at all. So, as the story begins, the Zhel and the Tongs are fighting a battle against each other at the city of Zhel, and it looks like the Zhel are about to win. And just as it looks like the Zhel are going to destroy the remaining Tong forces, the earth shakes and a volcanic eruption occurs, which covers the sky in ash and devastates the Zhel forces. So, the Tongs, taking this as a sign of divine favor, rally their forces and defeat the Zhel. The story's final words are, "The Zhel fell on their faces in terror, and from the high place we ran in haste to meet them, and we were cloaked in shadow. The Maker had come to unmake, and the Tongs would be his instruments." So, even though that was a really, really short read, I really enjoyed it. I think I'm going to give it 4.5 ancient Coruscants out of 5. In a weird way, I think that this actually is a pretty fitting starting point for the Legends timeline, as humans, the Mandalorians, and Coruscant are all three really important elements to the overarching Star Wars saga. So getting to see a part of their ancient past and how the three are actually connected is pretty interesting. Because the story is written in a Tong perspective, you really get to dig into how the Tongs view and respect themselves as noble warriors, which of course will then feed into how the Mandalorians see themselves in modern times. And I hope we get to see one day in another piece of media down the line how the Tongs became the Mandalorians, because it's really interesting to see the Mandalorians start out as this alien race who's in a war against the humans, when one day they will become a multi-species society who has mostly humans. It kind of reminds me of the Sith, who start out as just a species and then their name ends up being used for the Sith Order as a whole later down the line. But I think that is going to get covered in more detail than the Zell and the Tongs. So, because I haven't gotten to any other Legends novels or comics or games, I can't really say for sure whether or not the information in this story will provide any crucial insights on anything, other than maybe a little bit of insight onto how Mandalorian culture started, or the fact that this implies that humans came from Coruscant. To be honest, I'm not really expecting anything in here to be super important because this was published in a reference book in 2011, which was 3 years before Legends got shut down. So I don't think they had a lot of time to integrate any of the details we learned. But hey, regardless of that, I really think that this was a great story. It was full of really great prose, and the Essential Guide to Warfare is filled with all kinds of stuff like that. So I highly recommend that you check out that book if you're interested in stories like that and a lot of other in universe information. But if you just want to read Notron and Flames in full, I'm sure that you can probably find it online somewhere. After searching on YouTube, I can't really see anybody that's made a video dedicated to Notron and Flames. And so I'm hoping that I can be the first person to make videos on a lot of obscure Star Wars media. Alright, guys, well, I think that does it for part one of the Star Wars Legends Chronological Review. Part two is going to be a bit of a shorter one as well because we're only covering a couple of comics issues and then a short story before we get to our very first novel, which is Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void. Also, this is the very first YouTube video I am ever uploading, so as you can probably tell, I really don't know anything about what I'm doing in terms of editing or presentation, so any feedback that you guys could give me on how to make my videos a little better, a little cleaner, a little more entertaining, please let me know in the comments. So if you want to see more from me and more from this series, feel free to give me a like and a subscribe, as they'll help me out, they'll help my channel grow. Dislike it if you dislike it, I guess, and I will see you guys in the next one. May the Force be with you always.